Hello to all of you. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Janub Association Union for Justice and Peace Policy, and of course also welcome you on behalf of Antifaschistische Aktion Infoblatt, as this lecture tonight is a cooperation event between these two organizations. So this is the Antifaschistische Aktion Infoblatt, and we have a cooperation on this today evening. I also want to thank to Afro for hosting us today, and as you may have noticed, it cannot longer be taken for granted that you have a place to have a public speak with an anti-colonial speaker in Vienna. The association Afro asked me also to ask you to sign the daily membership, since that is necessary for legal reasons. So there is a list in behind, and I think the list will go turn around, and you just sign your name and your email address or something like that. I don't want to go into the bullshit that happened with the University of Vienna and the Austrian Students' Union. I had to tell you yesterday, because I think we had a press conference, we have different press statements from the Janub and also from Dhoruba Bin-Wahad. There will be also a letter, so you can Google all these informations, you can see it in the press, in the media. The Electronic Intifada wrote an article about this, also the news forum Rubicon wrote an article about all this, what happened for the lecture yesterday, so that we have to come also yesterday to Afro. And instead of telling you about the situation yesterday, I want to thank also KSV Wien, not to be confused with KSV Lilly, which is part of this shitty Austrian student union in Vienna, trying to violate the lecture yesterday. No, thanks to KSV Wien, the Communist Student Union, who offered us a location in a case of emergency and showed solidarity. Thanks also, of course, to our cooperation partner Antifaschistische Aktion Infoblatt for the cooperation in bringing Dhoruba Bin-Wahad to Vienna. And of course, thanks a lot to Dhoruba Bin-Wahad, who came the long way from the US to hold his lecture in Vienna and stand with us after all this shit happens with this shitty white supremacy University of Vienna. So thank you for coming, Dhoruba. I don't want to bother you again with the Janub stuff, what our association is and what it stands for and what we do and why we do it and these things, because I think if you are interested, you can Google us and visit our website, visit or like our Facebook site. And of course you can make a donation to support our work, because we are independent, we are really independent, but we depend of course of the nations. We don't get any grants from the city or the government or the University of Vienna or any political manipulator. But instead of introducing you the association, I rather want to explain why we think that it's so enormously important to bring Dhoruba Bin-Wahad to a city like Vienna or a country like Austria, to hear what the former Black Panther member, Dhoruba Bin-Wahad, who was 19 years in prison for his political beliefs, have to tell us. This country, as most European countries, have a long history of colonial crimes against the people and countries of the global south. And there is no process of coming to terms with this past, whatever that could mean. But in the opposite, more and more European countries are proud of their colonial crimes they have committed in the countries of the global south. In the opposite, the European and US governments and their media and their universities and the whole establishment of these European and US countries continue their colonial policy, raping and murdering people by spreading hatred, racism and Islamophobia against people of color in their own countries. And especially in Vienna, they are even not ashamed to put parts of the bodies of African people to auction in the Dorotheum of Vienna. And even the left, or the so-called left, or communist socialists, don't see the importance of putting this central contradiction, the colonial relationship between the global north and the global south, into the agenda of their work. To repeat also what what our enemies don't want to hear, the enemies of freedom don't want to hear, this anti-colonial struggle also includes, of course, the Palestinian struggle against this European settler state, Israel, of course. And Dhoruba and his comrades from the Black Panther Party and from the Black Liberation Army were fighting against this racism the last decades and keep fighting until today as activists. So we are very, very glad to welcome you, Dhoruba. And with this short introduction, I want to hand over to you.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank my host, my gracious host. They're very energetic. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm going to stand up soon, so I can see people and look you in the eye and see whether you're getting this or not. But first of all, I just want to thank everybody for coming out. I mean, folks like you have been very, very receptive, very warm, and I appreciate that despite the coldness and insincerity of. I should speak up louder?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I said I'm very impressed. I'm very grateful for the warm reception that I've gotten from people here, from people who are involved in the struggles that confront us today. But I want to talk. The other day, I didn't talk about myself at all. I don't know if some of you were here yesterday. But those of you who were, I deviated somewhat to talk about our common humanity, to talk about our obligation to our children and to our future and to this planet, to stand up for what we believe, to stand up for what's right, to stand up for what empowers people as human beings, and not for the material gains and materialism that the society attempts to program us into. So I'm going to read a brief piece that I wrote to you to contextualize why we are living in an age that is very significant. We are at a turning point in human history. We are living in a very troubled time and a time of great potential. And one day I sat down and I penned some notes before I came here. And one of the things that I realized from talking to Oliver and Marcus and other people here, Victoria, who's writing a compilation of essays, is that we are living in the age of information, but people are ill-informed. We are living in an age of instant communications, but people hardly talk to each other. We are living in a global village, and we have barricaded ourselves behind our ideologies and behind our race and behind our differences, not realizing that we have more in common with each other than we don't have in common. So I want to say that in this age of information, information is intelligence. In this age, ignorance is no longer bliss. And how and what you should know, rather than what you think you know, determines your place in society. We are living in the age of information, and ignorance is no longer bliss. You know, we've always wondered how the Nazis, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party, could convince a nation of millions to exterminate other human beings and believe that they were doing something noble and progressive and nationalistic. How is that possible? How could a whole nation be deceived by a small man with a mustache? How? And I want to start off with this thought, and I think you should keep it in your mind as we talk and as we discuss things. And I think I wrote this in my farewell to your illustrious dean of the University of Vienna, Mr. Engel. I wrote a farewell letter to him, and I invited him to put together a faculty of his choosing so that we could have an open forum and an open discussion about the issues of our time as they relate to people of color. Now, I know he won't answer, and this forum will probably never happen. But I thought, out of the tumult and confusion of my appearance here, there's something positive and beneficial for the Austrian people could be contrived. So I want to quote George Orwell, you know, in his novel 1984. We passed 1984, right? And he said, quote, "Those who control the present control the past, and those who control the past control the future." Let me say that again. Those who control the present control the past, and those who control the past control the future. History has amply illustrated that those in power are inclined to conceal their crimes by concealing their abuse and hypocrisy with secrecy, with propaganda, and by rewriting history. They alter the past in order to steal your future. One of the greatest weaknesses of the so-called generation, my generation, of civil rights leaders and activists, and their physical, ideological progeny that grew from the civil rights movements of the 60s, has been a descent into the abyss of inhumanity, of insensitivity to human suffering, to human need, indeed, to the condition of our planet. And we have descended to the point where white supremacy in this day and age is considered an acceptable ideology. Let's think about that for a minute. The rise of the right in Europe, the rise of right-wing politics in Europe, is a phenomenon today that sweeps across the northern hemisphere, Europe, and the United States. And it's couched in such terms as to give the populace the idea and the notion that somehow people of color are encroaching on their livelihood, their culture, and your being. We fail to realize that civil rights, voting rights, racial equality are essentially meaningless without the capacity and ability and options of sovereign thinking. All of these things that we think are good for us, racial equality, democracy, civil rights, are meaningless if you are not a sovereign thinker. If you cannot think for yourself. And see, that's where propaganda and mass delusions and white supremacy and fake news take place. They first of all take place in your perception of reality. And they nest inside your heart and in your soul through your subjective response to that reality. So we could have here in Austria, literally the birthplace of anti-Semitism and racism, a left that supports a racist European settler state and the inhumane treatment it metes out to the Palestinian people. We could sit here comfortable, well-fed, secure, while in the Congo, in the past 10 years, over 5.7 million people have been murdered and died in various forms of starvation, malnutrition, and civil war. We can sit here and do that because we can use our cell phones, because we can use our computers to shop online, to make reservations at the opera and at the movie. But the ingredients that go into this cell phone and into this computer come from the heart of Africa, the Congo. Just think about that. There's young kids, and many of you here probably have children, probably younger than your child. I know they're younger than mine. My youngest is 9 years old, who are working in the mines, in the mud, as we speak, to extract minerals, to be smuggled out of the Congo into Rwanda, to be paid for by Samsung, Motorola, and iPhone, and then shipped abroad to be transformed into the materials that comprise our little gadgets and toys and our communication devices. How much money does that child make in the mud and muck of a coltan mine or a bauxite mine or a copper mine? Nothing. And standing over him is a militiaman with a gun. Oh, where did the gun come from? It comes from the #1 purveyor of arms on the planet, the United States of America. And how did he get this weapon? He has this weapon from the collusion between corporate interests and the military-industrial complex and the U.S. military. Make no mistake about it. The #1 purveyor and salesman of arms of mass destruction is the United States and its allies, the European Union. The #1 purveyor of weapons distribution in the third world is the United States and its allies. And you know who the #3 producer is? Who do you think? Russia? No, they're #2. No, Israel. You know, in 1968, the Black Panther Party newspaper, which we call the Black Community News Service, printed an article about Zionism. And on the front page of the newspaper, it said, racism plus nationalism equals genocide. And subtitled was racism plus Zionism, or my bad, Zionism plus nationalism equals racism. Now, why did I single out Zionism? We know that nationalism has been the bane of human development ever since the collapse of the Roman Empire. nationalism, jingoistic nationalism. Me, I'm better than you. I want what you have, and I will take what you have because we are better than you are. We deserve it, you don't. Might makes right. This has been the mindset of nation states for the past 3 centuries. And now in this age of globalization, we have to develop a new mindset. A mindset that we all are on this planet together and we all are human beings, and those individuals and those organizations and those political parties that would divide our humanity are not our comrades. They are not our friends. They represent the potential destruction of the human race. Because we have to live on this planet together whether we like it or not. And how do we do that? How do we cooperate with each other? And I think people don't understand what black nationalism or Pan-Africanism really means. You know, Amilcar Cabral once wrote, and I'm paraphrasing him, that the African liberation struggle, that African liberation is a return of Africans to their own historical continuum. In other words, when the Europeans and the Muslims from the East invaded Africa, they disrupted and redirected the historical continuum of African peoples, cultures, religions, and states. And black people, African people, under colonialism became a footnote to your history. Not the major text of your history, a footnote. Go into any European history book that you have here about the history of Austria or the history of Germany and see how significant black folks are treated. They're a footnote. And I think Oliver pointed out that right here in Austria in the museum, you have human beings who were stuffed and mounted like animals in your museum because black lives didn't matter. They still don't matter. And no one is outraged by this. Everybody looks at it and says, oh, that's quaint. And you keep it moving. But could you imagine if you went into the museum today and there was a stuffed European going through the gates of a miniature or a set of Auschwitz? You would be horrified, wouldn't you? I just posted a picture today that was sent to me by a comrade of King Leopold's mercenaries and workers and colonials in the Congo hanging a 7-year-old boy. And they were reading the Bible as they hung him. A 7-year-old African boy. And you know why they hung him? Because his father couldn't produce enough to satisfy the overseers. So to punish the father, they hung his son. Yeah. To punish the father, they hung his son. What was that if that was your son? To punish the father, they hung the son. To punish the father, they hung the son. And you cry. White Americans are crying on television when Mexican migrants fleeing poverty, fleeing civil conflict, tried to find a better life by crossing the borders into North America, and their children are snatched from them when they reach the border. And everybody is upset. How could you take children from their parents? It's such a traumatic thing. It's the wrong thing to do. And Trump had to backpedal a little bit on his new policy. Hey, but I'll tell you something. They took African babies from their mama for 400 years, snatched them from them, took them and sold them. And to this day, you have Africans in America that don't know who their great-great-grandmother was. All they know is she might have been on the plantation of Mazzamore. But nobody cried then. Nobody cried for that boy that was hung because his father couldn't produce. This was King Leopold did that. He did that and more. He committed more atrocities than your number one hit parade leader, Adolf Hitler. Born right here in Austria. Wasn't he born here? He came from among you. He came from among. And his hatred of European Jews was not a construct of Africans. It was not a construct of Asians. It was not a construct of people of color. It was a construct of you. Anti-Semitism comes from you. But when I came here to speak about me, I was called an anti-Semite. Because I want to speak truth to power. Because I do not want liars and inhumane people to appropriate the past in order to determine the present and guide us to a future of division, war, and hatred. Because you see, war is profitable under capitalism. Without war, the threat of war, there is no profit in capitalism. So that means that capitalism depends on us being alienated from our own humanity. Marx calls it the alienation of labor, doesn't he? He calls it the alienation of labor in post-industrial Europe. Well, Marx never had an analysis of the global South then, did he? Marx never pontificated on the effects of white supremacy and colonialism among people of color, because people of color did not contribute to the continuation of white supremacy. They were the justification for it. So when we talk about the institutions that have evolved from then to now, the institutional adaptation of white supremacy and power and politics, we're talking about the permanent marginalization, the permanent dehumanization of half of the planet comprised of people of color. Half of the planet comprised of people of color. And you don't want to look at your history and say this was wrong. And this is what has become today. This state of affairs means that social and political inequality is never addressed with a thoughtful and truthful dialogue. We are all hiding behind our past, trying to justify, trying to rationalize, trying to make like we are disconnected from the past and we are creating a new way, a new future. But a recent survey I remember, and this is an aside, came out and said that immigrants to the United States have generated over $90 billion to the U.S. economy. 90 billion. I said that, say it again. 90. $90 billion to the U.S. economy. These are migrants, immigrants, populations, Mexicans, Chicanos, Africans, some people from the subcontinent. They have contributed $90 billion to the U.S. economy. And what does Trump and the racists say? The immigrations and the illegal immigrants are costing the U.S. $10 billion a year in revenue, in taxes, et cetera, et cetera. So when this report came out, one of Trump's staff, one of his inner circles, decided that the report could not be made public at this particular time, especially when Trump was trying to build a wall. You see, for those who are Muslim here, there's an understanding that for everything that happens in the material world, there is a spiritual consequence. Everything that happens in this material world, there's a spiritual consequence. And when Donald Trump stands up and says he's going to build a wall to keep America safe and secure, I smiled because I remember I lived for 20-something years behind a wall. And that wall was designed not just to keep me in, but to keep other people out. So when the United States build a wall, and I pray that they do get it up and going, they are constructing their own prison. White America is constructing its own prison to keep America white again. And the EU is doing the same thing. The rise of Le Pen and the right in France, the rise of the right in Italy and Germany, right here in Austria, are all indications that Europeans are doomed at their own hands. You are building your own prison. You want to keep the people out that you've exploited for 300 years, people whose society that you ravaged and conquered for your own gain. And then you say when they try to cross the Mediterranean and they die in the process, that they're pitiful, that we don't need them here because they're taking our jobs. There's not a job that a migrant worker from Africa can do here that you want. Not one. None of y'all are going to clean toilets. None of y'all are going to wipe nobody's ass. None of y'all are going to sweep the streets. But people who come from a society where they put their children into orphanages so that they would survive, they're willing to do that for a better life. And you're telling them that they're just coming here to take food out of your mouth and money out of your pocket. So when Amilcar Cabral said that African liberation is a return of the African to his or her historical continuum, it means that before the white man came, we were headed in a certain direction. It may have been a bad direction. There were empires that rose and fell long before the Europeans came to Africa. We may have been making mistakes. We may have been making the same mistakes that you're making now. But it was our mistake. It was our country. It was our continent. It was our children. And so when the Europeans came, conquered, and colonized, we became your footnote. You could hang our children for not being productive and read the Bible while you did it. You don't have no problem with that. I know some of you seen some of the lynching pictures from the United States where the whole town will turn out and celebrate while they hung a black man and castrated him, burned his body and tortured him, and then pass around parts of his body as souvenirs. Hey, that's what they did to my ancestors. I should forget that. I should say, let's bygones be bygones and let's move forward. We cannot move forward until that injustice no longer exists in our presence. We can't move forward. We will never move forward until there is a reconciliation and a recognition of our humanity. And that's what's so important. And that's why last night, I didn't talk about ideology. I talked about our common humanity. I talked about our common interest in justice, in our common interest in the future for our children. That's what I talked about. And I believe that I may be delusional, that I touched other people's hearts and got them to think about what they should be doing. I'm not telling you what to do. I can't do that. Only you know what you can do and what you can't do. But what I am asking you to do is something, to organize. Because you see, when the Black Panther Party first stepped on the scene in 1966, and I'm talking about the Oakland Black Panther Party for self-defense, in which I was a member. When they first stepped out on the scene, we were portrayed as thugs and gangsters, as criminals. That's what we were portrayed as. We hated police. We just hated the police because they were the police. We didn't have no rhyme or reason, no ideology, because we couldn't think that far, right? We couldn't understand that somebody that had their boot in our neck had his boot in our neck, and we didn't know who he was, and we didn't have a clue. If you can't understand how condescending that is, I don't know what to tell you. Because out of that evolution of the Black Panther Party, what became apparent is that America could never be reformed. That white supremacy, which is a socio-cultural construct, could never be reformed away. It's in the DNA of Europe. It's in the DNA of the United States. It has to be abolished. Open heart surgery, perhaps. Political open heart surgery. To cleanse the heart so that it could beat healthy. That's what you need. You need political open heart surgery because your hearts are poisoned and corrupt. And I never can't get enough of trying to explain to people how we have become so callous and inhumane towards each other. I can't explain it except to use the analogy that I use with the drowning baby. I don't know how many of you saw this video since I said it before, but there was a video on Facebook or YouTube or one of those places where a baby in the United States was drowning in a public pool. Small baby. Baby was about this big. Was drowning in the pool and no one helped the baby. All they did was photograph him drowning and posted it on YouTube. They streamed it live. Huh? A baby was drowning in a public swimming pool. And everyone photographed the dying baby. Nobody even thought to save the children, the child. Now, would you stand in the pool and watch a baby drown 3 feet from you? Would you? You find that unimaginable, right? You say, how can somebody do that? Somebody can do that, and you can do it because you believe that what was happening to that baby had nothing to do with you. This was just an event. Oh, let me photograph this. It's an event. When the police kill a black man running away, plant a gun on him, and then said he feared for his life, there are people who would stand up and say, well, he shouldn't have ran. He's running away. Yeah, let's get this clear. He's running away. But the police are scared for his life, fearful for his life. So he shoots him about 6 times in the back, and then say, oh man, I shot this guy in the back. So let me put a weapon on him and say he took my weapon and then he was running away and I shot him. But, you know, just pictures. Same people that would photograph that baby They photographed a black man being shot down in the back. So then you would have people who come forward and say, well, you had to see what happened before all of this. I'm sure the officer had a good reason. There is no reason to shoot someone in the back that's running away from you. There is no reason, there's no rationale, there's no justification. You can't say self-defense. And I was told the other day when I talked about Israeli snipers killing young people on the borders at the fence of Israel, shooting them down, snipers, professional military snipers who are in counts maybe 100, 200 yards away. There's no threat on their life. And they'll shoot down someone. Someone in the back said, yeah, that's what they were supposed to do. You see? That's the same mentality that filmed the baby dying. It's the same mentality. It's the same mentality that hung the child because his dad couldn't produce. Same mentality. It's the same mindset. To that reactionary soldier, he was doing his duty. And what did they say at Nuremberg about your grandparents doing their duty? What did they say at Nuremberg? That was no defense. Shoveling people into an oven and incinerating them, murdering them, killing them. I was doing my duty is not a defense. And now in every military code of justice and code of law, a soldier is told that if an order is inappropriate, if an order violates the humanity of an individual, you don't have to follow that order. That came from Nuremberg. But what do we hear today? We hear precisely that argument from Israeli snipers killing innocent Palestinians. We hear that same argument from a cop gunning down a black man in the streets who's unarmed. We hear that same argument. So when the Black Panther Party came along, it understood one fundamental proposition, that the monopoly of violence enjoyed by the state, the monopoly of violence that was enjoyed by the state was not morally justified because the state itself was morally and ethically corrupt. The millions of people that followed the Nazis, ordinary Germans, marched off to the Russian front with bands playing and everything. Oh yeah, I watched the footage. I watched it for years, you know. I used to be a History Channel buff. And you know, they have World War II in color. You know, they have, Crusade in Europe. Yeah, I don't know if any of you watched those things, but I did. And I said, how could this nation do this? How could they do that? And now I know. Because your heart is corrupt. Because you need open heart surgery. You need to be healed. And healing comes from you standing up. Healing comes from your personal commitment to justice. Not ideology, not theological dogma, not religious fanaticism, but to very fundamental and basic justice. That's not too hard to understand. But how would you know what's just if the people who are victimized by the state and by the system that you hold your allegiance to, if you never hear their story, if you never listen to them, if you never say, oh my God, how could somebody do that? Then you could say, well, I could understand how you feel the way you do. What could I do? You know, there was a friend that was talking to me that lives in Algeria. And I made a sarcastic remark about the current Algerian regime. And one of the things that I started to talk about was the French left, French communists, who, when the Algerians were fighting for their liberation and their independence, they could not endorse the violence of the FALN. And then when the FALN brought their struggle to Paris, to Marseille, and started blowing up cafes with nice, proper French people in it, they were horrified. The Algerians were called terrorists and murderers, just like you call Muslim bombers who kill innocent children, who kill innocent people, you call them animals. You say there's no justification for it. And there isn't. I would agree. There is no justification for killing and maiming innocent people. But you know what? Algeria got its independence. It got its independence. And the reason why it's got its independence, because the only way for people of color to speak to people like you is that you have to bleed like them. You have to suffer like them. And who's caught in the middle? Our children, our loved ones, people we care about. And this condition was brought about not by you, but by those in power who sought to conceal the past and control the present so they could direct the future. You let them lie to you and tell the French that Algeria was a part of France, and therefore the Algerian revolution and liberation struggle was against the French law. Algeria was part of France. Yeah, check that out. Check that out. Algeria was a province of France. How did that happen? It's like the Israelis tell us, or tell the Palestinians, that the land that they lived on for 500 years actually belonged to them. And they came back to claim it because God gave it to them. And God's name was Balfour. That was God's name, Balfour. So, Almighty Balfour, for purposes of the British Empire, manipulated European Zionists, who, by the way, supposedly represented the interests of European Jews to have their own homeland. In fact, they were going to set it up in Uganda. It was going to take black folks' land. That would have been funny. Could you just picture that you supporting Israel in Uganda today? You would do it. Don't act like this is fantastic, because it's just as fantastic for Ashkenazi Jews and Khazars to come from the region of the Caucasus and claim that the Levant was given to them by God. That's like me moving into your living room and tell you, hey, this living room actually belongs to me, because see, God gave me this living room. So now I'm gonna let you sit over there on the corner in that chair. You can have that chair. But the rest of this living room, TV, everything, God gave this to me. And if you don't like it, you can get out of here. In fact, don't sit in that corner, sit in that closet. You can say, well, that's patently absurd. I paid rent here. I've been living here for so many years. Where are you coming from? I'm coming from the position that might makes right. I'm coming from the position that if I take it, it belongs to me. So you take it. They did the same thing in South Africa. They came and they said, well, the land is empty, so we're just moving in. And once the Europeans got settled, they had one problem, one major problem in South Africa. You know what that problem was? The expanding Zulu nation. Here was an indigenous African nation that was just as militarized, just as crazy as they were, and just as ruthless. Now, don't think that the Zulus were some type of saviors and that their nation state was a savior, because to the minority tribes the Zulus conquered, they was just as much an oppressor as the Boers. My point is that nation states in the modern era have become the bane of humanity. They suck us of our lifeblood because we don't control and we don't have a monopoly of violence that the state possesses. And you can look right out the window now. All your taxpayer money goes for all the new police cars and all the armored trucks and everything that you see. It's your tax money. And then you notice, and I noticed that the police here tend to be more polite. They tend to be more gentlemanly. They tend to be more civil. Because you look just like them. You are them. But in the United States, where the police have evolved out of slave-catching militias, a black man is seen as a threat, whether he is armed, unarmed, whether he is big, small, or a child. Tamir Rice was only 12 years old, and he was gunned down in a second because the police viewed Tamir Rice as a threat. And here was a 12-year-old in the park with a BB gun, and the minute that the police car pulled up, just as the door was open, he was shot dead. Now, what would you say if your 12-year-old son was shot dead? You would want justice, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you? Don't make like you wouldn't want justice. You would want justice. And then when you don't get justice, when the cop tells you, well, he feared for his life from a 12-year-old with a BB gun, and then he's acquitted, nothing happens to him, what would you do? You'd be ready to go ballistic, right? Yeah. You'd be ready to go ballistic. Ain't nobody killing my baby and getting away with it. That's what you're thinking in your head, ain't it? Ain't that what you're thinking in your head? But what you're thinking is right. Because the cop that killed him was wrong. But because he's an agent of the state, and because his boy was black, and because black lives don't matter, and because the cop had blue on, nothing is done. So when the Black Panther Party stepped into the historical moment, when black people were being beaten in the streets for the right to vote, when they were being attacked by dogs and fire hoses for the right to vote, the Black Panther Party said, hey, no more of this. Like James Baldwin said, no more flood the fire next time. So the Black Panther Party stepped into history with the instrument that they knew the state understood, the gun. The almighty gun. I hate people with guns. I hate soldiers with guns. But like Mao Zedong said, in order to get rid of the gun, you have to pick up the gun. Obama, I don't know if any of you remember Obama's Nobel Prize speech. Here, the first Negro executive of empire gets a Nobel Peace Prize while he is unleashing drones in Pakistan, Somalia, North Africa, while he is waging wars in different countries, he gets a Nobel Peace Prize. And then I thought about that. I said, well, that's nothing surprising. De Klerk got a Nobel Peace Prize. Kissinger got a Nobel Peace Prize. Kissinger. You remember him? And then I realized that the Nobel Peace Prize was always given to some pop star of the moment that Europeans wanted to fool people with. And you know, they couldn't give de Klerk the Peace Prize by himself. So they threw Nelson in there with him. They couldn't give it to Kissinger by himself, so they threw Lee Doctorow in there with him. And now, I suppose, if Trump gets the Peace Prize, who they gonna throw in there with him? Benjamin Netanyahu. Hey, don't laugh. They both deserve a Nobel Peace Prize. Because the Nobel Peace Prize isn't about peace. The Nobel Peace Prize is about sanctifying the authors and the practitioners of war. You know, the only one that got a Peace Prize by himself before Lee Doctorow and Kissinger was who? Dr. Martin Luther King. And when Dr. King got the Nobel Peace Prize, he had a platform that he didn't have before. And then what did he first start talking about? Poverty, war, and imperialism. He dedicated his life to uplifting the poor. And when the man was shot down, where was he shot down? He was shot down in Memphis on a hotel balcony because he came to march for sanitation workers. You can't get lower in society than a garbage man, a black garbage man in the South. If you get lower than that, you're underground. But he came to fight for the defenseless, the poor. And then he said, this is with the Nobel Peace Prize, that sadly, that his nation is the #1 purveyor of violence on the planet. That man had to die. Because they gave him the Nobel Peace Prize, not for him to say those things, but to say to the United States, stop putting dogs on people trying to vote. Stop denying the humanity of black people on national television, because it's making us look bad. It's making European democracies, Eurocentric democracies, look bad. So they gave him a Peace Prize. They gave Mandela a Peace Prize because he had already compromised the economic future of South Africa. He had already committed himself to finance capital, not to nationalize the diamond mines, the gold mines of South Africa. That they would run as usual, and that the reappropriation of the land and the return of the land back to the African people that was taken by the European settlers would occur in an incremental fashion. You know, to this day, 70% of the land that was appropriated by whites in South Africa is still in their hands. And all of the leadership of the ANC that were applauding Nelson as he walked hand in hand out of South Africa, out of the prisons in South Africa, the majority of that leadership are millionaires now. Millionaires. And African people in South Africa are still in townships. In fact, just a few years ago, the ANC government gunned down African miners. The same way the apartheid regime used to gun down African workers and African students. But this was being done by the ANC. This was being done by a majority black government. How was that possible? It's possible because the modern nation state is an inhumane instrument of social and political control. Nationalism must mean the liberation of our humanity. And that's why black nationalism has always been about the expression of our humanity as black people. That's why the slogan Black Lives Matter has bubbled up seemingly out of nowhere. It was not attached to the black radical tradition. It's a new generation's realization that their lives don't matter, that the black lives don't matter. So they took matters into their own hands and went into the streets to proclaim to the world that you are killing us and our lives don't matter. And what was the response of the state? The response of the state was to mimic and demean the phrase black lives don't matter by saying blue lives matter. Now, who do you know in this room that's blue? Who do you know in this room that has a blue life? You a light bulb? You incandescent? Who's blue? Blue is not a human being. Blue is the color of a uniform, and the uniform is a representation of the state. It's a representation of, quote, legitimate authority. I have the right to kill you if I believe you are breaking the law. And people think that when they see the police in America, you know, the police in America always have on the side of their car stuff like to serve and protect, you know? When you really look at police in America, they're not there to protect people. They're there to protect property. You just incidental. Mess with the property and see what happened to your ass. That's why I love the anti-fascists, but they don't care. They'll beat you up, destroy your property. Why? I respect them because I know and you know who you are. And we know in Africa, in Asia, what white folks are about. They have never came into our territory in our country and we didn't have to run them out. They would stay there forever if we don't run them out. How are you going to run them out when their military is occupying your territory? Dien Bien Phu didn't happen because Ho Chi Minh was a peaceful protester. The United States didn't go into Vietnam to shortstop the unification of that country because they were concerned about democracy. They established a despot to represent U.S. interests in South Vietnam. And it's being done today across Africa. Netanyahu just came from West Africa a few months ago and signed almost $1 billion deal with 13 or 14 ECOWAS countries to do trade, to do commerce, to do business. Signed a deal with these countries, former colonies of the US, of Europe. He signed a deal. Do you think any of those leaders, those African leaders, had any shame? Did you think that they considered who they were signing this deal with? They were making a pact with the devil. But they didn't care. All they were concerned about was bringing in some money and some business into their country. Not because the people were going to benefit, but because they were going to benefit. Because they were going to benefit. These are the people, these are the leaders in Africa who are on the African Union, who represent Africa on the Pan-African Continental institution we know as the African Union. And do you know what? The African Union, it has a unified military council of 53 or 54, whatever nation states. They have this unified military council so they could negotiate with Nato and they could negotiate with the US in order to get military aid and training and all of this stuff. They have an economic council where everybody's on this to encourage trade between African nations. But you know one thing that they don't have? They don't have a Pan-African Refugee and Relief Agency. And Africa has the largest population of displaced people on the planet. But it has no relief agency. Now, how is it that you could have a unified military command, unified economic council, a council for governance, you had a council for everything, but saving the lives of African people? There's not one. The AU has to rely on the Red Cross, Red Crescent, the Salvation Army, UNHCR, UNICEF, everything. Has to rely on all of these outside humanitarian agencies in order to address the needs of African people. And these are the African leaders. The nation state as it evolved after World War II is the worst instrument imaginable for the progress of humanity. And at the top of this hierarchy of evil is the United States Republican Party. You can't get crazier than white folks in the U.S. Republican Party. Some of the things that they say, your mouth will drop open. Here's a bunch of ignorant old white men passing bills that affect the lives of millions around the world. Half of them haven't even opened the book. They wouldn't know where Sri Lanka was unless their aide pointed it out to them. They haven't got a clue. Do you think Donald Trump has read a book in the last 15 years? Do you think he ever read a book? I mean, do you think the boy could read? We know he could hit a teleprompter, so he must have a few fourth grade reading skills. Look at Tony Blair, another example. Tony Blair was historically an ignoramus. And this is who you elect to political leadership of the West, of democracy. Donald Trump. Really? I mean, just think about that. You ever heard the axiom, you get the leaders that you deserve? Oh, you all deserve Donald Trump. Americans definitely deserve him. They got him. They got what they deserve. And he's going to lead them straight to hell. Because you see, he believes that he's the deal maker. And Muslims know who the real deal maker is, don't we? It says in the Quran that men plot and plan, but Allah is the best of planners. And I told you, and I repeat it, for every material transgression you do on this planet, for every inhumane act that you commit against another human being, there is a spiritual consequence to you and to the society that allowed you to do it. And why is that important? It's important because, like I said last night, there is not an issue right now, not a contradiction right now, not a crisis in any part of the world that does not have its roots in an historical injustice. Whether that injustice is perceived or real. Every conflict we have today is a result of an injustice that happened yesterday and that was never addressed. Think about that. That means that you have to unpack your history with some integrity, with some morality, with some dignity. You are not a Nazi. You don't think like Nazis. You would never, in your wildest dreams, say, I would do something like that. I would never stand by and watch a baby drown and film it. And I don't think anyone in this room would say that. But we do it. Because it's EU policy that has people starving in the Congo. It's your nation's complicity with that geopolitical paradigm that has people starving in the Congo. It's your money that buys the weapons that's given to the militias that kill the helpless civilians. It's you doing it. And they're doing it in your name, in the interests of U.S. foreign policy, in the national interests of the Austrian people. Yes, the people, they use you. Hey, they ain't say, my interest is yours. Hey, I'm just helping you. I'm just doing what you want me to do. And you nod your head and you don't say nothing. So, when someone comes along and decides that you're the enemy because you said nothing, you're outraged. He's a terrorist. He's killing innocent human beings, but you didn't say nothing. You know, I had a very close friend who was once the ambassador from Ghana to Cuba. He was the ambassador from Ghana to the United Nations. And he was killed by al-Shabaab in a shopping mall in Kenya. My good friend, dead, gone. He was anti-imperialist all his life. He grew up under Kwame Nkrumah. He believed in the liberation of African people. He was a writer and a poet. He was a diplomat. And he went shopping in Kenya with his son, and al-Shabaab attacked the market and killed him and over a dozen others. Did al-Shabaab know that they were killing someone who had fought for their independence, someone who believed in their right to self-determination? Did they know that? No, they didn't know that. He was just somebody in the market, in the mall. He was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But then when you stop and think about it, he was there to give a lecture, and he just went shopping. The only reason al-Shabaab was in that mall was because of Kenyan involvement in Somalia. The Kenyans were in Somalia killing Somalis on behalf of the Americans. On behalf of the Americans. Now, Trump, and before him, Obama, they've been bombing Somalia for the past 5 years. Killing innocent people. They've been blowing up wedding receptions, killing so-called high-value targets. Yo, you got to kill this high-value target. He happens to be in the masjid with about 150 other people. So let's just, we'll obliterate the masjid and say everybody in there were terrorists. My point is, if Kenya was not in Somalia, the Somali fighters would not have seen Kenya as an enemy. And my friend would be alive today. But because of US policy, because of EU policy, Kenya was in Somalia. Ethiopia was in Somalia. And the conflict in that area, what was that conflict about? Why is America interested in that area? Because it is strategically vital to the flow of oil and resources out of East Africa and out of Saudi Arabia and the Middle East. It's of strategic value to the oil companies, to the energy companies. It's of strategic value to international finance capital. So, what are we going to do? Is it too late for us to do anything? But the reason why I'm here talking to you is because in Austria, you are the people. You can change all of this. Anything man has done, man and women could undo. You could change that. But it's not my duty to change you. It's not my job to reform white supremacy. It's not my job. That's your job. My job is to abolish it. My job is to be an abolitionist, not a reformer. So I take the hard line. And the hard line that I take, and the hard line that many Pan-African nationalists take, is that it is not our duty to reform white supremacy. It is our duty to destroy it by any means necessary. So reform perhaps is your job, although I doubt very seriously that the European states as presently constituted could be reformed through the ballot box or through parliamentary procedure. Hey, you can give it a shot though, but I don't believe it's going to work. You have to become abolitionists just like me. You have to say, I'm going to create a new world. I'm going to create a new world order that's based on my humanity, that's based on my relationship. You know, when the internet came along, what did we find out about the internet? We actually have more in common than we have differences. What if the United States and NATO called a war and nobody came? Everybody say, you old fuddy-duddies, y'all go fight the war. What if nobody came? They must be like, yo, somebody got to fight this war. Well, it ain't me, and it ain't my children, and it ain't my neighbor's children. Of course, you're going to have guys that's going to come, they're on some macho stuff, and they're searching for their manhood or whatever the case may be, and they'll step forward. Good for them. They need to get out the way anyway, so maybe they get killed in the process. Then you be rid of them anyhow. But it's not your war. The only war that you need to wage is the war with yourself. The only war that you need to wage is a war to regain your humanity. Not your nationality, your humanity. Now, for me, I come from a people who have been enslaved, deprived of the ability to accumulate wealth, consigned to prisons and gulags across the United States. Many of us have become a permanent underclass in the United States. So you see, I have a different agenda than you do. My agenda is to abolish white supremacy. My agenda is self-determination for African people. Real self-determination. Now that's your agenda too. Because when you abolish this inhumane edifice that you call the modern nation state, and you reestablish a new social and political relationship based on your common humanity, based on the needs of ordinary people, based on preservation of life on this planet, you're creating a whole different paradigm of power. That's not based on external control, but internal principles, internal humanity. So we got two different roles here. My job is to get rid of white supremacy. Your job is to abolish the inhumanity that white supremacy has given you, has instilled in you. Because there's certain things that you don't really realize, just like misogyny. And the women can understand this. The women here know there is no such thing as a male that's not misogynist. He got to work at that, right? And how is he going to work at it if you're not in his face? If you don't tell him, hey, that ain't working, that's not right, then if he loves you, if he cares about you, if he cares about his mama, if he cares about his sister, if he cares about women, he's going to examine his behavior and he's going to modify it. Well, that's what you got to do with white supremacy. That's what you got to do with the modern nation state. You got to get in their face and let them know that what they're doing is wrong. And you're not going to tolerate it anymore. And I know some sisters that won't tolerate any misogynist behavior from me or anybody else. But it's good for me. It's good for me. Because I'm not always cognizant that I'm being this way. Or I'm being insensitive. Or I'm being misogynist. I'm not always conscious of this. I had the fortune to have relationships with women who were strong feminine, strong black feminist revolutionary women. And that's where the tire meets the road, is how we face our common enemy. And when you're on the front lines, whether it's in the guerrilla warfare or on the front lines of civil disobedience or civil rights or fighting for justice, we are all comrades in this, and we are all equal when we face the enemy. The enemy is not going to distinguish between you because you look pretty and me because I'm ugly. To him, we both are wrong and have to be controlled. So it's our relationship to what is wrong and unjust that determines our relationship to each other. And this is the most important message that I could bring that I could try to give to you from my experience and from the experiences of our movement, that we have to stand for what's right, as the Muslims are commanded in the Quran. It says, "O ye who believe, who will come to help those who are oppressed and afflicted, if not but you? You are the best evolved of humankind. You enjoin what's right and you forbid what's wrong. You enjoin what's right and you forbid what's wrong." And this isn't a decision you make based on theology. This is a decision that you have to make individually based on your humanity. It's said in the Quran that you speak German. I don't speak German. Some of us in here speak Arabic. I don't speak Arabic. Some may speak Spanish. I don't speak Spanish. But what does it say in the Quran? What does the Creator say to all of us? That He has made all of us into communities. And He has made us speaking different languages and different tongues so that we would know each other, not so that we would despise each other. So these different languages are all part of the human mosaic. When the Spanish talk, you can feel Spanish culture. When they sing and you dance, and we all dance to all kinds of music, don't we? Some of us dance to music, we don't even know what they're saying in the song. Because it's not the words in the song, it's the humanity, it's the soul in the song that moves you. Like I say, to use a term that's said in the hip hop industry, it's the beat in the drum that makes you come. It's the drum. It's the beat. That's universal. Every person that has a heart has a beat. We need our hearts to beat together. We need to have our hearts beat in rhythm. That's what we need. We need to be in touch with our hearts, not our ideology. Our ideology is supposed to reinforce our heart, not our heart reinforce the ideology. So we know what's right and wrong. We know that somebody is totally scrambled up who would go somewhere and gun down innocent children for a cause, for a belief that they're right. We know that's wrong, don't we? We know it's wrong. But we also know it's wrong for a drone to destroy families and villages in the blink of an eye for geopolitical interests, for the interests of war machines and profit. We know that's wrong. And what are we going to do about it? Because it's our military that's doing this. It's our sons, it's our brothers, it's our uncles who are in this military that are doing this. And they believe they're doing their duty. They believe they're standing up and protecting you. And you have to say, you're not protecting me. You protecting corporate Austria. You know the Crumps, Daimler, Benz. Hey, wasn't those the guys that made the Tiger tanks in World War II? Huh? Volkswagen, all of them? Wasn't these guys the maker of war machines for the Third Reich? If you're in Japan, wasn't it Kawasaki, Nissan, and Mitsubishi that made the fighter planes, that made the bombers, that slaughtered people in Nanking? And do you know what? Daimler-Benz is still here. The family that got rich off it, they're still rich. They're living over on the other side of town, right? Where you don't go too tough because things are too expensive, right? Go to Japan, Kawasaki, man, they make some slick generators. Toyota, Mitsubishi, still around. Ford, you remember Henry Ford? He was a fan of old Adolf. That was his boy. Same Henry Ford that subsidized white supremacy in America. This is all your history. And the people that perpetrated these inhumane acts for profit are still here, are still calling the shots, are still running the state. And you have this delusion that somehow y'all are free. And y'all democratically chose these people. You know, I was talking to Oliver, or Marcus, I believe. I was talking about the irony of the United States talking about Iran was a theocracy ruled by these mullahs and imams and stuff. And so the people really had no choice. That if Khomeini or the head of the Iranian theological elite decided that someone shouldn't run for office, then he wouldn't get the chance to be on the popular vote. They picked and choose who they wanted to run for prime minister and president. Well, that's exactly what Americans did. How do you think Trump got there? The Americans do the same thing. They pick and choose who is going to be in the primary that people can vote for. And you only got two choices, Democrat, Republican. Both two heads of the same snake. Democrat and Republican. You could vote for the Wicked Witch of the West, Hillary Clinton, or you could vote for the Dumbo of the East, Donald Trump. That's your choices. Take it or leave it. And then you have Bernie might slide on in, doing a little buck dance. Hey, I'm Bernie, and I'm about, debt forgiveness and students shouldn't. He got all these nice semi-socialist and social democratic ideas. And you say, yeah, he's the man. Let me work for him. But he's gang. They just threw him in there as a wild card so that you could get all worked up. And then when you get to the polls and the votes are counted, old Bernie goes out Trump style. You see? Who's the victor? The Donald, the buffoon. And everybody says, oh my God, how did this guy get in there? You deserved him. You deserved him. Don't think that he got the majority of votes in the United States. He didn't. He got the majority of the electoral college votes. And in America, democracy doesn't mean that the party that comes in second then could form a coalition and be part of the government, and you have some liberal social democrat ministers here and some leftist ministers there. It doesn't mean that. In America, it's winner take all. And the electoral college system was set up by who? It was set up by the founding fathers of the United States. You know who they were? According to the British, George Washington was a wanted man and a criminal. So was Ben Franklin, and so was his homeboy, what's his name, John Hancock. All of them, they were all considered by the British Empire criminals and outlaws. So they set up their own means and mechanism of transferring wealth and power amongst themselves. At the same time, they imported my ancestors to build that wealth and that primitive accumulation of capital, and worked us for 300 and something years without a paycheck, without any compensation. So they set up the electoral college system, which meant that you have states in the United States where there's more cows than people, but yet they have just as much clout as a state with more people than cows. The electoral college system, it's a sham. That's how someone like an idiot like Trump could win the electoral college vote and lose the popular vote by 3 to 5 million. Lost the popular vote by 3 million. So the system is rigged. And now people are seeing that the reason why the system was rigged is to protect property, is to protect wealth. And you ordinary working class drone, you don't have wealth. You have to work for a living. Donald Trump ain't worked a day in his life. He wouldn't know work if you poured it on him. And the elite that's running the United States now, the plutocracy that's running the United States now, their wealth is based on the inheritance and the passing on of wealth by the state and by the system. There's no redistribution of wealth or redistribution of global wealth would only occur when the modern nation state is transformed. And unless that transformation takes place from the ground up, it's not going to work. So when we talk about Pan-Africanism, when we talk about what I call New Age imperialism, which is globalization, we are talking about the institutionalization of a history of oppression, exploitation, rape, and murder of people of color. And now it's called globalization, world trade. And every country that provided the basis for colonial powers and colonial wealth today are the same nations that are on the IMF tip. They're on the World Bank aid tip. Same nations. They went from being colonies to being debtor nations. But their wealth is still being extracted, still going to make your life comfortable. Nothing has changed but the name of the game. It went from imperialism to globalization. And when we talk about democracy and the rise of the right, we went from free choice and democratic rights to hatred of those who don't look like us, exclusion of those who don't look like us, to class interests, to division. And it manifests itself in our politics. So I just want to say that we're going to take question and answers. And I know there's people here that got some crazy questions. But I also know that there's people here that got some astute answers. I never underestimate anybody. And I'm damn sure not going to underestimate your humanity. I believe in all of you, ultimately, because I believe that the mere fact that you're here, trying to understand a difference in reality, an ontological perspective that's not yours, means that your mind is searching for what is true and what is right. That you're here not because you want to be an oppressor, not because you want to support oppression, but you want to make a difference somehow, some way. And I'm saying that that difference can only be made when you are in touch with not just your ideological correctness or analysis, but when you're in touch with your humanity and you could distinguish between right and wrong, when you know that you will not film a baby that's drowning in front of your eyes. If you could do that, then you will not allow a child in the Congo to starve to death while it's on your watch. You will not let a child be murdered because he wants or she wants a future. And she's standing next to a border and shot in the head based on the orders that some idiot with a gun was given. That to you, that's reprehensible. That you are not going to look at a black man or a black woman being shot down by a white cop while he or she is running away and say, hey, they must have did something wrong. That's not acceptable to you. And when it's not acceptable to you, as a community, as individuals, as families, that's when things will change. We can't be passive. We are not living in a passive historical moment. And I come from a people, and I come from a segment of the people, because, you know, if I was living in the bullwhip days, I probably wouldn't have had no feet, no hands, or nothing. I was living in the days of slavery. But I come from a tradition, a radical tradition in America that fundamentally says that the damned don't cry, they get even. And if we don't mourn, we organize. Don't mourn, don't feel sorry for nobody. Organize, organize, organize. If you don't have an organization that fits your character and your temperament, start one. I don't care what you name it, start it. and get people in it to feel just like you, to think just like you, and to figure out what's going to be our mass line. What are we going to stand for? And if it ain't but six of you stand up for it. Don't mourn, organize. Because you got to believe, coming from me and those who think like me, we don't mourn, we get even. And that's the only thing that oppressors understand. They only understand when they cannot oppress you. If somebody wants to lynch me because of the color of my skin, like Kwame Ture said, that's their problem. If fascists want to beat me up, that's their problem. It's not mine. It's my problem if I let them. Nah, that's my problem. It's my problem if I let them beat me up, if I let them torment me. And it's your problem if you let the state dehumanize you. It's your problem. It's not the state. It's not those people that are sitting up there with money and wealth. It's your problem if you let them do it. So that's what power is. Power is the ability to prevent those in power from doing what they want to you, from acting out their racism, their sexism, and their oppressive behavior on you. That's what power is. It's their problem if they got a problem with women. Hey, that's their problem. But if women let them exercise that, then it's your problem. And that's what it's all about. We can't let people in power do to us what they want to do. We have to put an end to this somewhere and start with a new beginning. So I just want to say that we're going to open for questions, and hopefully the women will ask more questions this time than the men. The reason why I say that is because women tend to have more insight into the subjective factor in struggle than men. That's not a put down, and it's not a build up. Because Allah said He's created everything in pairs. Everything is created in this universe in pairs. There's yin, there's yang, there's negative, there's positive, there's up, there's down. There's you, there's me, there's she, there's he, in pairs. Even in energy, that's how Einstein discovered the law of relativity, isn't it? Everything is created for a purpose. And so, ask these questions. Questions that really bother you. Whether they're questions about the past of African people or whether you have issues with violence. I know a lot of you have issues with violence. You say, man, I'm not about violence. Okay, cool. I feel that. I'm not about it neither. You see? I could understand that everybody wants to live in peace. Nobody wants to be in a violent environment and you're fearful. But there's a poet who said, what will our season be? Which starts from fear. That we should live and bloom and go out and have our blooming in the noise and whip of the whirlwind. Because in the whirlwind, we are citizens. In the struggle for human dignity, we are truly citizens. That's where we have our blooming. That's where we have our humanity, in struggle. Without struggle, without sacrifice, nothing can be attained. And so I'm saying to you, do what you know is right in your heart, but before you can do that, purify your heart. So that what you're doing is not just for yourself. It's because you see that what's being done is harmful and hurtful to those who are coming after you. Your children yet unborn. That little kid that you see running up and down the street that always made you smile. What is her future? What world are you going to leave that child? A world of war, threat of war, hatred, racism, classism, sexism. That's the world you're going to leave that child? Because a lot of us are hopeless. A lot of us are lost. We done. We ain't going to change at all. But that child, they got possibilities, man. And that's where we have to look. Not so much cleansing our heart so that we can feel good about ourselves, but so that we can feel good about the attempts to leave a better world behind. Because nobody's getting out of this life alive. Do you know anybody that got out this life alive? We all are going to pass. And as the poet said, life is real and life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Life is real and life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Your life is real. Your struggle has to be earnest, so that when you do meet your maker, when you do transit, you will be remembered. And in the tradition of African cultures, that when you speak the name of someone who died and passed, they live again. So when you speak the name of a freedom fighter, of someone who stood up for humanity, that person lives again. So I hope one day you speak my name because I did what was right. Not because I sound slick, but because I did what was right. I have my foibles, my shortcomings, we all do. But I try to do what's right. Not based on how you look, or how I look, or my gender, or your gender, but because it's right. Because I identify with your humanity, and I hope you identify with mine. So I just want to say that I appreciate you listening to my rant and my ramblings, but I always love to take the opportunity to talk to well-meaning people, to people who are already committed in some way or the other to the betterment of our societies and our cultures and our peoples, people who are already committed to understanding each other better, so that we would make war profitable no more. War profits no one but those who build war machines and those who divide humanity. Those are the only ones that profit from war. So, with that closing, I want to say, in the words of the Black Panther Party, power to the people. I was told that that there's a few activists here from different persuasions, and I really want to talk about those. If you're going to speak up and ask questions from that persuasion or that perspective, that's cool. It's okay. I'm not trying to censor anybody, but I would like for you though to do so within the context of your philosophical position, and not do so in an abstract or combative or negative way. You have to be consistent with your own principles. And you know, you're told in philosophy, when you go to Philosophy 101, you have to argue a philosophical point of view from within the context of the philosophy. So let's do that here when we're talking about various issues that we might feel strongly about and that we may feel that is inhibiting our ability to organize people and move the paradigm forward. I know the first hand that went up was a man, okay?
But I think, no, just one moment. I think the first word should be to our cooperation partner. I don't know who is speaking or wanted to ask something or... Yeah?
First, and also for the anti-fascist action, I want to say thank you. You came the long way to Austria to make this event today, and Also, we was in before because there was. I have to say sorry for my English a little bit.
It's okay. It's better than my German.
We also discussed because the people from the university who didn't want to have you there because of your struggle, and so it's also something I think we as political activists can learn about from this event here with you, that the Black Panther Party is has more meaning
Than the symbolism.
Yes.
Yes.
And this also it was shown with these actions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, you know, we know propaganda. We know that, I mean, Donald Trump comes up and he talks about fake news. Well, you know, for black folks, news has been fake a long time. It didn't just start with Trump, you know. There were stereotypes about people of African ancestry for years. This is why when Oliver pointed out that you have black, actually not wax figures, actual human beings that were stuffed and put in the museum as exhibits. Africans, you see? And what people don't realize, that this was done long before the Nazi persecution and genocide of European Jewry. So this meant that thread of inhumanity that was exhibited towards Africans because they were considered primitive and they were considered this and they were considered that by racism, that meant that inhumanity, that thread was always in you. And that the minute that it could be released and unleashed at someone that you perceived as being different and your enemy, it went crazy. Look at Yugoslavia. The minute Tito died, neighbor turned on neighbor. I mean, they grew people, I mean, Croats and they grew up next to each other. Their children used to play with each other. Before you know it, they're slaughtering each other. How did that happen? That meant in those people all the time was the historical contradiction that was never resolved justly for those people. So that the moment 4 generations later that the chains and the restrictions were off, everybody went at each other's throats. Look at the genocide, the genocide in Rwanda. Hutus and Watusis were together, but it was the French that went into that area that elevated one group over the other and made them neo-colonial administrators. So once the gloves was taken off, they went at each other with a vengeance, killing millions, hundreds of thousands of people and children. So you got to ask yourself, where did that hatred, that inhumanity come from? It didn't just pop out the air. It has to come from somewhere. And that's what I'm urging you guys to look at. Where is this coming from in us? You see. But you were going to... You could continue, I'm sorry.
I also wanted to... was hast du schon? Agree with you also in the point of white supremacy, and also I would call it chauvinism. Chauvinism? Mm-hmm. And it's a very big point also in the anti-fascist struggle in Austria. And you also said Yugoslavia, but also I read that there is also Austrian military in Mali now, for example.
You're part of NATO.
Yes, and even though Austria is says it's a neutral country, so a support to our enemy as well as your enemy is our own state. Mm-hmm. Is this the state, our own state? Who is doing this? Is this the imperialist state and the imperialism as a whole? So I really support this, also the struggle against the imperialist countries and the chauvinism who have the people also inside them in the imperialist countries.
That's true. Austria is involved in a a panoply of treaties and unilateral or multilateral arrangements that has the Austrian military contributing to the foreign policies of the EU everywhere. You know, I mean, you have NATO troops in the Congo. Do you remember, what was NATO created for? It was created during the Cold War to prevent what? The Soviet Union from invading Europe. And that justified the Americans having troops here and all of this, you know. We all know the story. Well, so how does NATO, the North Atlantic, I think the words say North Atlantic Treaty Organization. If I'm not mistaken, the North Atlantic is not in Africa. I mean, the last time I looked, unless the poles done flipped since, you know. And so North Atlantic is not in Africa. So what is NATO doing in Africa? You see? And you're part of NATO. So you have an obligation, treaty obligations, to fulfill vis-a-vis NATO missions. So who determines what's a NATO mission? You see? And then we come to find out it's places like the US Pentagon. It's the State Department in various capitals of the metropoles who decided that we are going to fight a war in the Sahel for the resources that are in Africa. And the Sahel reaches all the way from West Africa to the borders of Somalia. This is a vast territory with millions of people in it. Millions of people who have not had self-determination, who were ruled by their local despots. Okay? And the United States has to intervene in Mali, NATO's there too, Mauritania, Cameroon, Niger. Just last week, 5 American soldiers were killed in Niger. You see? So your soldiers in your country is heavily involved in the tragedies and the atrocities that are happening in Africa right now. And if y'all can't do nothing else here, you could organize and send aid, create an aid agency, attach yourself to some Pan-African organization, bring resources to the table so that we could feed children, so that we could help the homeless, so that we could help at-risk people, and not ask the state to do it. You see? And organize and mobilize yourself here politically to ask your government to account for its policies in Africa. What are we doing in Africa to help the children? What are we doing in Africa to feed people? What are we doing in Africa that would save lives? What is our policy? You don't know what Austrian foreign policy is in Africa, do you? Who here knows what Austrian foreign policy is in Africa? Nobody. So you should have somebody from the Austrian foreign ministry sitting here where I am explaining to you what they're doing in Africa. And if he doesn't come here, make sure his ass don't get elected next time. Make sure that you elect somebody that will come here and tell you what they're doing. And so that you can say, hey, we don't agree with that policy. Let's debate this policy. Let's have a dialogue about this. I don't mean we have to cut each other's heads off and beat each other up. But that guy that's in that Ministry of Foreign Affairs, he represents you. And so what's the policy of Austria in Africa? What is it? You need to know it. And as activists, you definitely need to know it.
By the way, just officially, Austria is not part of the NATO. Officially.
Not part of NATO?
Not part of NATO, because Austria should be neutral, but of course they have contracts and they are trying to get into the NATO because they have the same interests.
Well, they have the soldiers in those contracts.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Other questions? We have a micro, Marcus. Perhaps, yeah, please.
So, firstly, I...
Speak up a little.
Okay. Firstly, I want not only to welcome you here in Austria, but also I appreciate it because just wanted to share your great experiences from your life struggle with us and wanted us to know this too. Secondly, I come to just accept and just say that what Black Panther Party did in America was completely a great and a big movement against the greatest imperialism of the world. And I think it's not something very easy or very simple to think about. I mean, every member of the Black Panther had, and as we saw, the courage to struggle against the exploiting system, the racism, and the imperialism in the country. So in the third, I could ask about the policies, the thinking of Black Panther Party right now about the internationalism, about the struggle in the world, specifically the class struggle, and also the view, also the general view of this party to lead the situation in America in benefit of the people. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, the Black Panther Party, just for your information, well, maybe we want to take the other sisters a question, but I can combine the answers.
Okay. That's okay. Yeah.
The lady in the back, you with a hand up. The ideology of the Black Panther Party evolved, okay? When the Black Panther Party first started out, it was the Black Panther Party for self-defense. Because Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale that started the party in California, they felt that it was necessary to defend poor people in the Oakland Bay Area from the brutality and the violence of the police. The police were very violent. A lot of the police, and you have to understand the culture of the Bay Area at that time and what the Bay Area represented. You know, the Bay Area is an area around San Francisco Bay, okay? It was a major port during World War II for the war in the Pacific, for the U.S. Navy in the war in the Pacific. This is where all the supplies and war materials that went to fight the war against the Japanese in the Pacific, they were all gathered and sent to there, and then they were sent further out into the Pacific to the Hawaiian Islands. And then, you know, so this was the staging area for the U.S. war in the Pacific. And everybody knows that the U.S. fought a two-front war, a two-theater war. One war in the East, in the Pacific, and another war here in Europe. Okay. So in order to deal with the logistics, in order to deal with the industrial deployment of resources and material to its military and its operations in the Pacific, a lot of the Bay Areas in San Francisco and San Diego, which is further south in another city, a lot of black workers from the South moved into those areas, and they were housed in these little, you know, shanty towns and little communities of surrounding these bases because they needed labor, you know, to load the ships, to load the ammunition, to do all of those things. So the black communities came into existence on the West Coast and concentrated where they were into these ghettos as a result of basically World War II and the logistics to fight the war, okay? But the majority of the police also came from the South. So they came with that racist slave mentality, slave master mentality, and they were the policemen. They were put on the police forces. And they were charged with policing the black population that constituted the labor class and the working class in those areas. You see what I'm saying? So they brought the attitudes of white supremacy and racism and the slave system in the South with them. So policing then was an extension of that type of control of black communities during the slavery and during Jim Crow and during the sharecropping era, right after the end of the Civil War. Okay, so when the Black Panther Party came along, it was in that context. So the Black Panther Party was basically about self-defense. Now you see, because white folks in America, conquered the continent, took it from the native people, took California and New Mexico and Texas from the Mexicans. They did it because they militarized themselves and they used their expansion and their conquest of the continent. They used the gun. The gun is a sacred symbol of Americanism. You have to understand the significance of the gun in American culture. Because without the gun, America wouldn't exist. Seriously. This is why it's written in the Constitution that citizens have a right to bear arms. And part of that is, so that comes from the experience with British colonialism. You see what I'm saying? Where the British would station troops in the communities, in the colonies, in people's homes. They had the right of eminent domain. They could take over a house to house the troops. And so this rankled the colonials, the settlers. And eventually, when they achieved a degree of independence, they wrote into the Constitution that militias have to be raised from amongst the people and that the people had the right to bear arms. Because if they didn't have the right to bear arms, then governments could do whatever they wanted to them, because the government had a monopoly on violence. The government was the one that had the legal right to arms, to organize army. So the civilians had to have the George Washington and them didn't trust their own the possibilities lay ahead. So they wanted to make sure that as landowners, and owning weapons too, went to a certain degree with ownership of property. So the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, was written into the Constitution of the United States. Okay? So the gun played a significant part in America becoming a nation state, a republic, and eventually the world power that it is. It was the organization of the gun. Okay? So there's even an old West saying that God created all men, but Samuel Colt made them equal. You know who Samuel Colt is? He was the gun maker of the Colt 45, the gun that won the West. So listen to this. White males, the settlers in America, said God created all men, but the gun maker Samuel Colt made them equal. So to the white male, the gun is not just an instrument of self-defense. It's a symbol of their manhood and power. Some psychologists might say it has a little bit of phallic worship in it. That remains to be seen. But basically, the gun has been an essential part of the United States' ability to conquer the West, to subdue the native population, and to control the slaves and the indentured servants that it imported to work the cotton fields and the cane fields and all of those things. It was the gun. It was the gun that the conquistadores had that gave them an edge over the Incas when they destroyed their civilization. To the West, the gun, to the white man, the gun was one of the most important instruments to its rise to power. Okay? So you have to understand that. That's very important to understand, because everything that comes afterwards then becomes very problematical. Because you see, during slavery, of course, black people weren't supposed to have guns. You ain't going to give a chattel slave a gun. That's stupid. You blow your brains out while you're sleeping, So you had to make it prohibitive for Africans, slaves, to have guns. To the point where, after a few generations, the idea and the notion of an African with a gun was terrifying. Okay? After the slave rebellions of Denmark, Vesey, and Nat Turner, and the hundreds of slave rebellions that occurred where slaves rose up, took the guns from their oppressors, and killed them in their sleep, and then went and freed slaves until they had to bring a militia in to put them down. And then what would they do? They would do just like the Romans. You know what the Romans used to do when they used to put down the slave rebellions? You know? They would hang all the slaves along the Appia Way, right? They would hang all the rebels along the way and let the crows pick their eyes out. So anybody who thought about rebelling could look up and say, man, I'm not rebelling. Look what happened. Look what happened to Aloysius. He's hanging up there, you know. I'm not rebelling. And this is exactly what the white slave master did in America. Whenever there was a slave rebellion, he would pick the most militant and the strongest males and females and hang them and castrate them and hang them up on the roadside to send a message to the slave population. And you got to remember, in many parts of the South, there were more slaves than white folks. Okay? So they had to be controlled. And the major mechanism to control them was terror and the gun. So the very idea and the notion of a black man in America with a gun was terrifying to white males. It still is to this day. That's why police shoot black kids. They don't see the kid. They see a grown, threatening black man, you understand, who might kick their ass, so he starts shooting them. He empties his gun in them and said, I feared for my life. And any court could accept that. Any white man is fearful of black people. Hey, I understand. You can go. I had to shoot him, boss. You know, he talked back to me. He told me to move out the way. So I feared and I just blew his brains out. Okay, you acquitted. Black lives don't matter. He's a slave. He's property. Okay, you got to pay the guy that owned him. Or you killed Mr. Johnson's slave, so you owe Mr. Johnson $500 because that was the worth of the slave. This is the mentality you have to understand. So when the Black Panther Party stepped forward with guns in their hands, this terrified white America. They were terrified. Niggas with guns? Surely that can't be allowed. And then they looked at the law. The law wasn't meant to apply to us, it was meant for them. And the law said that they could carry guns. We were no longer slaves, now we were citizens. And all citizens had the right to bear arms. You see how they locked themselves into a contradiction? They never thought that the day would come when the slave would own a gun. So they wrote it into the Constitution. So when Emancipation Proclamation came and citizenship was forced on us, that means we had the right to own a gun too. But we also had the slave mentality. We were afraid to have guns. We were afraid to use them. But in the South, it wasn't like that. Black families in the South were familiar with guns. They used to go hunt. They used them to hunt food. They used them to protect themselves. So in the South, that tradition of gun ownership was not something that was anathema, not something that was forbidden to the average black family. You see? So when the Black Panther Party came out in 1966 in Oakland, California, and before then in Lowndes County, and to defend black voters who were going to the polls, it terrified the white establishment. So they had to change the law. They said they couldn't take guns away from white people, so they couldn't abolish the Second Amendment. So what the state did was change the law or the right to carry arms in public that were loaded. You see? Now, Huey P. Newton was a law student. You see? He was in law school. He went to Merritt College Law School, him and Bobby Seale. So Huey was reading the law books and he said, yo, Bobby, you know, the law doesn't say anything about us not carrying guns. In fact, it says that we could do A, B, C, and D while an officer is doing his duty. And it's totally within the law. He was a law student. So what did Huey do? He got a gun and a law book. And he patrolled the police. Now the police at first said, man, this guy is crazy. And Huey would quote the law. Now you gotta remember, this is a cop. This is some Yahoo cop that probably didn't know all he knew that whatever he said the law was, that's what it was. Because he had the gun, and he was the one that was authorized to make the arrest. Do you see what I'm saying? So now Huey comes along with a law book and a gun, And when the police try to arrest some brother or brutalize him, Huey would read the law to the brother who was being brutalized and say, you have a right to remain silent. You don't have to say anything, brother. And this officer, if he's going to arrest you, you have to say you're under arrest. And if he doesn't say you're under arrest, you could leave. And the cops say, who's this guy? You know, shut up and get out of here. I'm not moving, officer. Section so-and-so and so says that I could observe a public servant performing their duty if I stand 25 feet away from them and observe the transaction. Section so-and-so and so, whatever. Now the cop, he ain't read the book. He don't even know. He said to his partner, really? Is that the law? Yeah, I don't know. We got to go talk to the chief and check it out. So they'll go back to the old Yahoo chief and the police. They say, hey, chief, there's some niggas out there with guns. Talking about they could watch us do our duty, and they got these big guns. Could they do that? And the chief said, well, let me look at the law. Yeah, they could do that. So hey, this got to change. So the NRA, the National Rifle Association, endorsed a change in California gun laws that would allow, that prohibited the carrying of weapons openly in public. And if you did, they had to be long weapons and they had to be unloaded, right? So they passed the law. And that was a law that was designed to inhibit the Black Panther Party for self-defense. Well, at the time that they passed that law, the Black Panther Party changed their name. It was no longer the Black Panther Party for self-defense, it became the Black Panther Party. Vanguard of the people. And the Black Panther Party at that time began to look at other people's struggles around the world. It looked at the struggles in China. And we began to read Marxism, Leninism. Now, we didn't read Marxism, Leninism because this was some white guy that we think that we should follow. We adapted the concept of analysis that Marx used to analyze industrial society. And so we were dialectical materialists and not really Marxists. It was the dialectical material method that we were using to define our condition in an industrial society. And we come to find out that we were not just the working class. That in fact the majority of people could be classified as what Marx called a lumpen proletariat. Because they were permanently unemployed, they were marginalized. This was Marx's industrial lumpen proletariat. Okay? So we had that swag like the lumpen. We wore hats on the side, we was from the streets. You understand? And we were banging with the police since I was a kid. Since I was a kid, we always had to deal with the police. And all of those young brothers and sisters who came up in the Black Panther Party initially, they were street guys. They came from the streets. So we understood the police. We knew that they were punks. We knew that they were cowards and they were bullies. And there's one thing that attracted me to the Black Panther Party. What did I tell you? I used to hate bullies. And the police were the biggest bullies in the community because they had guns and they could do what they wanted. You see? So that's what attracted a lot of us to the Black Panther Party. We joined the party to bully the police, to bully the bullies. And so that type of swagger, that type of attitude, couldn't be tolerated by white society. So something had to be done. So the FBI and the intelligence agencies and the police agencies decided that the Black Panther Party had to be exterminated. That black people had to understand that they could not that they could not defend themselves against the state. So they shot us, they killed us, we got in shootouts and all of these things. You understand what I'm saying? So I'm giving you this understanding that as the Black Panther Party first started out, it just started out as a means to defend ourselves against police brutality and excess. But as we realized, as we began to study more other people's struggles, we understood that we were not just about self-defense, we had to be about the liberation of our people. And how do you liberate your people in a modern industrial society? So that means we had to study. We had to have political education classes. And this is something that led to us organizing ourselves as cadre. Okay, so the Black Panther Party became one of the first black organizations that was a cadre-based organization. We were not just a bunch of folks running around. We had a quasi-military structure. We were a cadre-based organization, okay? We had political education classes every day, every evening. We had community education class where we would bring the community in and talk to them about their issues and listen to them and then get out on the front lines and try to find a solution. That's how the breakfast program came into existence. That's how the free health program came into existence. That's how we began to do clothing programs. That's how we began to fight for the rights of tenants and land against the landlord. And so that brought us to another understanding of Marxism that Marx didn't have, because Marx, you know, for all of his genius, for all of his contributions to the struggle of working people, was a racist. Homeboy was, you know, and so we had to deal with that. He didn't talk about black history. He didn't talk about the colonial conditions of people in the third world. Mao Zedong did. A person of color did. So we started studying Mao. We started reading Protracted War. And so we used the Red Book as our organizing, as our ideological basis. And that led us to what? Solidarity with people fighting against imperialism. People fighting the same enemy that was represented by the United States abroad. You see. So now we understood that the gun we picked up to defend ourselves against police brutality was in fact the instrument of state power. Because Mao Zedong said what? Political power grows out the barrel of a gun. So now what happens when a black man discovers that political power grows out of the barrel of a gun? That's some potent stuff there. So you're saying to yourself, so what you're saying is that the only reason these people got power over me is because they have the monopoly of violence and it's legal and I can't defend myself against that when it's unjust? So here comes the revolutionary part, you see. I'm not going to go for that. I have the right to self-defense. I have a right to self-defense against white supremacist vigilantes and against racist police. I have a right to self-defense. Now to the police, that's anti-police. Because what we're basically saying is that you have no right to transgress on my humanity and on my integrity and on my person simply because you got a blue uniform and that's what you want to do. And this is happening at a time when the police in the community are still killing African Americans at a regular rate. Just riots and rebellions every summer. And this notion that black people could bring America to its knees has spread through a whole generation of African American youth. That if we can't get human rights, we will throw a monkey wrench in the American political machine and economic machine, because that's what we represent, a big monkey wrench. We can make this place not work. If we can't get our rights, if we can't be respected as human beings, ain't nobody gonna be respected as human beings. It's freedom for everybody or freedom for nobody. That was one of our slogans. Freedom for everybody or freedom for nobody. You see? Now that is a problem for the status quo, especially with a population of over 25 million. So we are inherent subversive force in America. You got to understand, white America has always viewed black people as a potential revolutionary force because of their history, because of our history as chattel slaves. So they always believed that lurking in the heart of a black person is the desire to overthrow white people and kill them. This is how crazy they are. This is why you see my message to you is about common humanity, right? What's my message to you now? 50 years later, our common struggle, our common humanity. Right? But that wasn't the message back then. The message back then was power to the people, black power to black people, Latin power to Latino people. And that power to the people slogan resonated with people who were powerless. So we were the first ones to form coalitions with other ethnic groups, with Chicanos, with Mexican Americans, with Chicanos, with Araucan, with Asians, with Japanese Americans, with white working class from Appalachia who worked the mines, the coal mines. We were the first ones to form the Rainbow Coalition. And where did we get that idea, the Rainbow Coalition, from? From liberation movements, fighting imperialism abroad. from national liberation fronts, from Mao Zedong's analysis and essays on alliances and coalition. You see? So this was a very advanced political development that was going. This was long before Martin Luther King got the Peace Prize and decided that imperialism really existed and that Americans were the foremost purveyors of imperialism. So Martin Luther King had come to the conclusion that the Black Panther Party came to years before he died, was killed, you see? So when you say the history of the Black Panther Party, you try to understand the history of the Black Panther Party in the context of a white supremacist society that saw a black man with a gun as an existential threat to his ability to rule. You gotta understand that, because that's what's happening now today when you see black kids being gunned down by the cop and they're unarmed. So well, what do you kill them for? You see? It's fear. The fear is there now more than ever. And now there's no Black Panther Party. You see? Now there's no Black Panther Party, so they could kill us with immunity. And there's no resistance. But back then, there was resistance. So the lessons of the Black Panther Party came about from struggle. You learn as you struggle. You know, one of the first delegations that the black movement in America sent abroad was to North Korea in 1968. Did you know that the Black Panther Party sent an official delegation at the invitation of Kim Il-sung, homeboy Kim Il-sung's dad, to North Korea? And that the North Koreans expressed solidarity with the Black Panther Party? That the NLF expressed solidarity with the Black Panther Party? That the PFLP expressed solidarity with the Black Panther Party? That the People's Liberation Movement of the Republic of the Congo expressed solidarity with the Black Panther Party? That the revolutionary Algerian government that had just won victories from the French and their independence gave us a consulate and an embassy in Algeria? Huh? So this internationalism of the Black Panther Party came directly out of our ideological development as a cadre organization in America, which started out as an organization to defend black people in a racist society in which we were not permitted the right to self-defense. Okay?
Perhaps, Dhoruba, just seeing the time, I think we should
take some more questions.
Next question, yeah.
Well, I hope I explained the context of the Black Panther Party, because then you could see how the Panther Party was demonized as thugs, as killers, and just like the woman here called me. She said I was a criminal and
gang.
I was a gang. I was a gang, a terrorist that just wanted to kill cops. Yeah. That was my sole mission in life, just killing policemen.
Okay. So, please.
Is it working? Okay. And my cousin's actually gone to pray right now. She wanted to ask a question, but I hope I can paraphrase for her what she wants to get across. I suppose you mentioned your faith, and I was just wondering do you believe there was a correlation between your fight for liberation and your conversion to Islam? And I love that you focus on humanity and our common interest for humanity, because I believe personally that the root of injustice and evil comes from morals and the question of a moral compass and a person's morality. And I think, as you said earlier, that as a Muslim, we can find solace in the fact that any act of injustice will be accounted for. And I suppose I just wanted to ask, does your faith and does what your faith talk about morality, does that play a role in your fight for liberation? And yeah, because I feel like, so that's what I wanted to say. Sorry, I really want to articulate myself well, just because I think we can learn a lot from you and about this specific topic, so. Yeah.
I appreciate the question. It's a good question. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, I wasn't converted to Islam. I returned to Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says all living creatures submit to Allah. That's what Muslim means. So I returned to Islam. And you need to remember, almost a third of the Africans taken from Africa across the Middle Passage were Muslim. And so Muslims were enslaved in the Middle Passage for different geopolitical reasons in Africa. But absolutely, during the era of the Black Panther Party, one of the things, and I explained it before, one of the things that really, when I was arrested and made a political prisoner, was that there was something missing in our struggle. And the missing part of our struggle when we were on the streets and we were trying to do the right thing was a certain spiritual compass, certain spirituality, you know? And it's ironic, I mean, maybe it's providential, but I returned to Islam at the same age that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was given Wahid, was given revelation at 41. You see? And one of the reasons that I returned to Islam is because it validated what I wanted to stand for. And I quoted some passages, I paraphrased some passages from the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the believer that you are the best evolved of mankind. You enjoin the right and forbid the wrong. And that's what we were about in the Black Panther Party. We wanted to enjoin the right and forbid what was wrong. And when those types of messages came through to me while I was in prison, it caused me to understand that there had to be a deeper spirituality to what I was doing, to what I was trying to do. I had to be more in touch with myself as a generational energy. You see? So, yes, absolutely, Islam has had everything to do with my evolution as a revolutionary, with understanding my humanity. And you know, in Islam, I don't want to say a principle. There's a reality called Taghut. And Taghut is the organization and the manifestation of evil. It's organized. Taghut. So what I was talking about here, if we were to put it in Islamic terms, when I was talking about the state, when I was talking about its murder and its rapaciousness and its evil, I was talking about Taghut. To Muslims, that would be Taghut. And Taghut is an organized, it's the organization that Shaitan uses in social relationships. It's the political power of evil. Okay? And I felt that it was my duty, before I was a Muslim, to stand up for my community, to stand up for my people, to stand up for myself. And Islam just made me realize that if I don't stand up in the community, who will? Who? Who will? And that's what the Quran tells the Muslim. If you don't fight for the oppressed and for the enslaved and for the imprisoned, who will? Who? Who is going to do it if you don't do it? And yes, my answer to your question, absolutely. Absolutely. And we know from Imam Jamil al-Amin, may Allah be pleased with him, who's now a political prisoner in the United States, has been a political prisoner for the past 30 years in the United States. His name used to be H. Rap Brown, used to be a civil rights leader, used to be the chairperson of the Student for Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, one of the major student organizations of the 60s that integrated the South, that fought for voters' rights, and he was one of the first advocates of Black Power. He's now an imam. He's been an imam for years, and he's been in prison. He's in sickly health. But Imam Jamil wrote a book called Revolution by the Book. I don't know if you ever read it. I believe it's called Revolution by the Book. And he talks about his evolvement from an activist to an imam, understanding that what I said in the beginning, for every material deed and act that we commit, there's a spiritual consequence. There's a spiritual reverberation and results. So I want to say to your question, absolutely. I believe that Islam is the religion that enjoins us to do what's right and forbid what's wrong. And Allah tells us that because we're different, because we look different, it doesn't mean that Allah's soul, the soul that we have in us as human beings, is different. It's not. We all have the same access to doing right as to doing wrong. And so, yeah, I think that Islam gave me a greater sense of community. I think it gave me a greater degree of understanding of diversity and humanity. So absolutely. And it gave me a greater tolerance for other people's religion and other people's values. So yes, it did absolutely inform my consciousness.
Okay, last question, perhaps, gentlemen?
I still want to ask a question.
Ah, okay. Marcus?
So, Bismillah, Assalamu alaikum. First of all, I want to thank you for coming here, and I want to welcome here in Austria, in Vienna. And subhanAllah, first of all, I want to really thank you for mentioning Islam and Quran when it comes to such important topics. Especially when it comes to so important values like dignity, justice, and freedom, and liberty and oppression, because truly those values are so important in Islam as well. And I think you can only find solution in Islam, of course. So I was really we were so yeah, it was so great hearing you talk, because there's so many talks, we went to so many talks before, and they all mentioning their ideologies and power motives, and it truly shows that your intentions are pure and that you're sincere in your talks, and by mentioning the creator of all of us, from all of us, it's really alhamdulillah, subhanallah, really. So thank you for that. And my question was, or our question was how did you find Islam, or how did you convert it to Islam, or convert it back to Islam actually? And what was your life story, your personal life story? I hope it's not too personal for you.
Well, I'm writing a book, and if I could ever get a publisher, he's telling me to self-publish. That's what's happening with all these activists here. Do it yourself.
No, I just said the problem is the translation into German.
But absolutely, I would say that what brought me to okay, this is a little I don't want to seem melodramatic, but my return to Islam was nothing compared to the Prophet's ascendancy to the mountain when he went to meditate, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the power of Wahid when he said, Iqra, read. And the Prophet Muhammad said what? Oh Allah, I don't know how to read, right? I can't read, right? And again Allah said, Iqra, read. He said it 3 times. And 3 times Muhammad said, I can't read. And the 3rd time, Allah endowed the Prophet Muhammad with the power of Wahid, of understanding, of insight, of prophecy. And he said, read in the name of your Lord.
Also, Entschuldigung, dafür bitten wirklich, dass mal solche Kommentare keine Sicht.
So my point is, I returned to Islam in much to, I'm sorry, say?
We have I think, no, it has what does it mean, sorry, what does it mean, you can ask your question, you can discuss it, but not in this way. I'm sorry, not in this way, okay? If you have a question...
Is there a problem?
Yes, he has a problem.
What's his problem?
He cannot discuss. Please ask the question. It's where have discussion.
In English, please, sir, if you please would talk in English so that Dhoruba can understand what you want to say.
What's your problem?
Karl Marx said once, and I think it's one of the best sentences he said, religion is the spirit of the unspirit. As it is, also Religion ist der geistlose Zustand, wie es der Aufschrei der beschränkten Seele ist.
We are talking in English.
Okay. Religion is the spirit of the unspirit.
What the fuck did Karl Marx know about spirit? I'm asking you, don't stop me on this shit, because I'll go straight up ghetto on your ass. I'm asking you a question. The sister asked the question. The sister asked the question.
Talk for you.
No, I think that what you need to understand.
It's the Aufschrei der bedrängten Seele. It's the scream of the deprived soul.
Yeah, it can be the scream of the deprived soul, and I'm gonna tell you about the screams of deprived souls There's millions of them laying at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean that your ancestors took out of Africa. Those are the screams of deprived souls. And me, I'm here to hold people accountable for the people that's at the bottom of the Atlantic, whether you like that shit or not. Okay? So when you talk about my spirituality or you talk about the spirituality of Muslims, you need to keep it in context, because Marx was just as much a racist as the Austrians are today. And I read Marx and I understood what he means. What you need to do is read George Jackson. That's what you need to do. You need to read George Jackson and understand the limitations of ideology and understand the limitations of dogma. Okay? I am not dogmatic. And so
this is no discussion.
You're right, there is no discussion. It is no discussion. The sister was asking me a question, and she was asking the question about what turned me around to deal with the spirituality in me. Don't think that because I'm spiritual, I won't kick somebody's ass now. Don't think that because I'm spiritual, I'm down. Huh?
You can go.
You can leave.
No, he doesn't have to leave.
I really don't like the way you discuss.
Well, you don't have to like I'm saying. Wait. If you don't like what I'm saying, listen. No, he doesn't have to leave. You don't have to leave. If you don't like what I'm saying, then let me hear some principled arguments that make some sense, or you could take your ass out of here.
And he has to accept the rules of discussion because it was not his part to talk about. No?
Excuse me, can I make a comment? If you don't mind.
Is the question finished? I mean, your answer, because we had
no, but see, the sister asked you.
She left because she was insulted because he said it's bullshit. That was the first thing that nobody heard when he said. He then said what you're talking about when you were saying what you felt in the book. He said that's bullshit. And that's why she was offended, and she left.
Well, she shouldn't be offended.
I told her that, but
she shouldn't be offended because you see, the reason why she shouldn't be offended, and let me clarify, but you see, I'll go ghetto on your ass real quick. You see, because I come from the South Bronx, so all that crap homeboy was taking, see, back in homeboy, he'd got a beat down. So I'm not opposed to struggling with him, but when he says bullshit, what he's saying is
he insulted.
No, it's not just an insult. What he is saying is that he's operating from a different paradigm of struggle than I am. So him, that guy there, people like him are the people that we're talking about here. Okay, we're talking about ideologies and theologies that prevent you from being in touch with your own humanity so you could understand the struggles of other people. Everybody's not motivated to struggle by spirituality. Huh? Some people are motivated to struggle by conditions, material, external conditions. Some people grow up never having anything, and they decide to fight for people who don't have anything. They could also make a decision to be greedy and try to get everything and control it themselves. That's why Allah says in the Quran that wealth and poverty is both a blessing and a curse to you. You could have wealth and not use it appropriately and in the right manner and with principles, and then it's a curse to your soul. And you could be poor and live a life of righteousness, and that's wealth that's untold. And where's that wealth coming from? It's not material. So when homeboy says bullshit, he's not just commenting on our religion. He's saying that my experiences is bullshit, which means then if my experience is bullshit, I will fuck you up. If you, now wait a minute. He said, the sister shouldn't felt insulted. That's what I'm saying. He didn't say, he said bullshit when in reference to what I was saying about why I went into Islam. Okay? So he's saying that what I'm saying is bullshit. It's a lie. That's basically what he's saying.
And she said she was insulted because he was given a microphone.
No, she was insulted because
He got a microphone.
you heard he said even what he said was nice. What he was about to say was intellectual revolutionary.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry. I didn't hear you.
I was just saying that she was insulted because when he first made that comment, what he was about to say, I don't speak German, but I can understand what he was about to say isn't going to be intellectual. He wasn't going to question it as he was being an Islamophobe. So the fact that you gave him that microphone, you gave him that platform that wasn't.
She said that was what insult.
Yeah, and I find that really.
Well, I don't think Marcus gave him the microphone because he wanted him to express that. I think that what Marcus thought that I had basically finished my response to the sister, you know, although I hadn't, and he mumbled bullshit. And so one of the things that we really wanted to do here was we wanted people like that to stand up and argue. We wanted to struggle with people like that. But he didn't want to struggle, that's why he left. And that's what I'm saying. I'm saying when he said bullshit, he was talking about me. He was saying that what I related to you that motivated me was bullshit. So I'm ready to struggle with this guy now because I know me and I know why I did it. He don't know me from Adam's house cat. So him saying that tells me one thing, that he doesn't believe my experience is legitimate. And that's the reason why I didn't speak at the university. Because they don't believe that the black experience is legitimate. Huh? And this is a dude that's supposed to be on the left side of the barricade with me. Huh? So that's why I didn't want him to leave. I wanted to beat his ass down verbally. Okay? And that's why I said the sister shouldn't have felt insulted. She misinterpreted the protocol when he gave her the microphone. As if he agreed.
She said something important. She said that everywhere she faces this trouble and she came here because she knew here she was at a place.
She was safe. And absolutely. And absolutely. Absolutely. And so I could see how that gesture would trigger something in her. You know, because she's used to being treated that way. Exactly. You see, but that wasn't Marcus's intention.
Of course not. I mean,
you see, yeah, you see, that's what I'm saying. That wasn't his intention at all. And of course, I mean, you know, she might have been a little quick on the trigger because she felt insulted. Okay, but that's why I said, that's why I went ghetto on him, because I felt that he wasn't talking about her. He wasn't talking about the dean. He was talking about me. You see? He was talking about me. And he was basically saying that what I said was bullshit. That's what he said. You see? And that's like me telling you, if you tell me your life experience, and I say, that's bullshit. Who am I to say that? Yeah. Now, I may be stupid enough to say that. I may be insensitive enough to say that, but that don't mean that what I said was correct. Okay? So if you tell me about your experiences, I can say, oh man, okay, that may not have been important to me, but it's important to you. So I might say, so why was that important to you? And then you will answer, and then that's how we will proceed. So if he felt that what I said was bullshit, he should have said, well, I don't feel that you did what you did because of that. You did what you did because of the lack of that, you know, which is saying the same thing. He's just using rhetoric. But he didn't say that. He didn't want to struggle over that, because you can't struggle with telling me who I am. I have never let white folks tell me who I am. That's why I'm here. That's why I didn't speak at the university. That's how I wound up in the Black Panther Party. I refuse to be defined by people who are not on the same side of the barricades that I am. You see? And that's when I started out with Amilcar Cabral talking about that black liberation is the return of the African to their own historical identity. And that man personified it. He said basically that my experience was illegitimate, that only his analysis of capitalism or all of this stuff really counted. You see? So I was ready for that, but unfortunately I'm sad that the sister left. You know, and I wish that if somebody that knows her could apologize and explain this to her.
We know her, and we will see her again, and we will explain, because I think it was very important to let this guy saying his...
yeah, I think so too.
I mean, he was not able to say it in English.
Well, then I think that maybe Denise
is a very...
yeah, I mean, yeah, but yeah, well, he was. No, maybe he did. Maybe he spoke less English than I speak German.
Maybe, yes.
So therefore, he should have been preferred the opportunity to be interpreted.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Okay. I think we should come to an end, or do we have another? Marcus, give me a clear word, because I see the time is.
2 questions, please.
2 questions.
Yes.
Okay, 2 questions.
I would like to ask 2 questions. First, you were criticizing...
You said 2 questions, and you want to do 2. Okay. It's okay. It was just funny. Go ahead.
Criticizing mostly democratic countries like USA, European countries, but you didn't say anything about China or North Korea, about the human rights there, and about the people who were oppressed or even killed there, like North Korea, or even Saudi Arabia, where also the human rights, the situation of human rights is very, very, very complicated. I didn't hear anything about.
That's true. And let me explain. That's your first question, right?
The first question.
Okay, so hold on to your second one. Let me answer that one, okay?
Okay.
Absolutely, you're right. I didn't say anything about that. And there's a few reasons why. Not because I think that North Korea or China is the bastion of democracy and human rights. Far from it. Okay? But I do know how imperialism and white supremacy works. And I know how it is easy, and it's very easy for African Americans to take the side of their enemy in opposition to other people of color and repeat the dialogue and the mantra of our enemy. If you notice, when I mentioned North Korea, I mentioned it in the context of Kim Il-sung and them showing solidarity with black people. Okay, I didn't talk about the conditions in North Korea or in China. Okay, and I assure you, the conditions in China were far worse before Mao Zedong marched into Peking in 1947 than they are today. Okay, so each country has its own unique history and dialectics and dynamics. I'm sure you agree with that. You see, and we can talk about human rights violations in China. We can talk about that, but we have to talk about it in the context of Chinese history. Now, if we want to talk about it in the context of Chinese history, we can go all the way back to Kublai Khan and the evolution of nobility and royalty in China, the Song dynasties and all of these things that set the standards of Chinese culture, which was misogynist, which was a peasant-based a society. A peasant in China didn't matter for much. You understand what I'm saying? And women in China that had their feet bound, it even mattered less. You see? So there's a history to China. And when we talk about Chinese inhumanity or dehumanization of Chinese people, we have to talk about it in this context. I talked about America and European democracy first because I'm in Europe. Second, because you're all totally familiar with the institutions and your history, and we both could agree on certain things and disagree on others. And also because I didn't talk about Austria in the context of China. I didn't compare Austria with Ghana. I talked about Austria in the context of the European experience and it's contributing to the experience of white supremacy. I could never talk about Austria using the historical experience of Africans, okay? I only could talk about Africans' historical experience in their relationship to Austria. You see, which is the reason why I didn't speak at the university, because nobody here wanted to hear it. But you raised a very cogent point. How do we as progressives, how do we as anti-imperialists, how do we as human beings reconcile the inhumanities of nation states and individuals, you understand, that we may favor, that we may think is more progressive than others, okay? You notice I did not ideologically pigeonhole your humanity. So you have to make that judgment call. We have to make that judgment call. Okay? I would be just as horrified if Chinese in a swimming pool allowed the baby to die as I would if that it happened in the U.S. I would still be just as horrified and still be just as messed up. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. Okay, it's not that I'm trying to gloss over the iniquities and injustices in these societies. They just have to be dealt with in their context. And we have to understand that the motives of the West in bringing up these issues is not to ameliorate the human rights of the Chinese people. It's not to help the North Koreans, but to wage hegemonic control over that region and over that. So they use human rights as a tactic, as a ploy. America is not concerned about the human rights of people in North Korea. Because if they were concerned about the human rights in North Korea, they wouldn't be snatching babies from mothers trying to get into America. Don't tell me that they're concerned about it, because they're not. If they were concerned about the human rights of the Chinese people, Trump wouldn't be talking about tariffs and embargoes. He'd be talking about how we can build up our economies so that the people of China and the people of the United States can prosper. Okay? Nation states, if you remember, what I said, that some of the foremost enemies of humanity today is the nation state. And what is China? A nation state. And it carries with it the baggage of all of the nation states that it's emulating. Its injustices, its racism. I mean, don't make like Chinese can't be racist now. I was talking about Eurocentric racism. Don't start me on Asian racism now. You understand? That's a whole different script. You see? Yeah, I think I touched on it yesterday. But yeah, I mean, it's a whole different script. So then I got to deal with a whole different I hope I'm making sense to what I'm saying. I'm not excusing them. And I'm not glossing over them. I'm dealing with white supremacy in the context of where I'm at, because Austria is a white supremacist nation state. You see? And it's part of a historical continuum of white supremacy. From the Habsburgs and everything. I mean, we talked about your museum that got black people in it stuffed. We ain't talking about a Chinese museum here. We're talking about your Austrian museum. You see what I'm saying? Now, I'm quite sure I will go to China and find some horrendous, inhumane stuff that the Chinese government is doing. And believe me, I would be just as adamant about critical of that with them as I am here with you. Because remember what my common theme was: standing up for our own humanity that we see in other people. And not being tied to dialogue, not being tied to ideology to the point where we can't see other people's humanity. So if I can't see the humanity of Chinese people who are oppressed by the Chinese state, then what am I talking about? So you got another question, right? What was the other one?
If I'm allowed to.
I'm sorry, say again.
Yeah, please, yes.
The second question is, I was very surprised that you, according to your biography, you converted to Islam. Because I have studied some at university about religious science and also about Islam, and I was really surprised because the Prophet Muhammad, he oppressed so many people, Arabic tribes. He even had slaves himself, and he put people that were free into slavery. So I'm really surprised that you become a Muslim. For me, this is a little bit.
Well, let me explain. Let me tell you something. The Prophet Muhammad.
I'm not Islamophobe. I have Islamic friends.
No. I'm addressing your question. I'm not looking at it as any type of hostile or negative. I think it's something that should be answered. So I'm not viewing your question as being hostile or provocative or anything. So just take it, I got you. I'm with you. I feel you. Again, in the context of Arab society, when the Prophet Muhammad came along, the Arab people were burying their girl children alive. Huh? They were burying their children alive. Huh? So Islam, when it came along in the context of Arab society, was a revolutionary reformist movement. Because Allah forbade that and told the Prophet, you can't bury your girl children alive. They have a soul just like you. That they're equal in the eyesight of God, just like you. So he had to change the mindset of a primitive Arab people. Keep it in the context of the Arab people. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, to every people, he has sent the same message, and he has sent it in their language so that they would understand the lie, not misunderstand it. So what's being said here, every people on this planet has had the same message that the Prophet Muhammad had sent to them. And they have come along in generations and distorted that message and used it for their own personal purposes. They use religion as for their own personal aggrandizement and empowerment. Allah never gave that message to empower individuals. He gave that message so that people would understand other people. Okay? So when the Prophet came along, he was a reformer in Arab culture. I mean, you're talking about some backwards people here. When you talk about the Arab, the Bedouins of the Prophet Muhammad, I mean, these guys was backwards. I mean, some of the backward stuff that you say, wow, they did that? You see? And you got to remember that the prophet came to a people that really had no civilization. They had no outstanding civilization. You see, so he brought a whole new moral code. It was the Prophet Muhammad that told those who owned slaves, that it was a blessing to free the slave, to give them their freedom. And if you notice, slavery under Islam never prevented a slave from rising to the highest pinnacles of power in the Islamic Empire. But picture a black man in Georgia becoming the governor of the state during the bullwhip days of slavery. It wasn't happening. Okay, they didn't even want us to read. Reading was a crime. Okay? So we have to understand things in their historical context, which brings me to today in Islam, right? You know, I guess you studied and you read and you said you got friends that's Muslim. There is a thing in Islam about innovation, you know, about changing methods and practices and stuff in Islam, you know, to suit the times, to suit the moment. You see what I'm saying, right? So that's why you have a whole school of thought, a whole school of fiqh that says that all innovation is bid'ah. All innovation is evil. So they rigidly adhere to everything as written. And then you have revolutionaries who look at Islam the way I do in the context of what it was given for. You see, and realize that it's flexible, that it's meant to apply to human beings in real life, in real time. Okay, it's not meant for us to go back to the 13th century and you know, throw hijab on women and lock them in the room somewhere and say, well, we're practicing Islam. You see, you notice that when ISIS, these guys, when they invaded what used to be Assyria, and they started destroying all of these ancient pieces of art and statue work that existed for thousands of years. Do you remember? I don't know if you know about it, but there's an account in the Hadith that talks about the Muslims when they first invaded Egypt, when they first went into Egypt. The invading army, you got to remember these are Arabs who were backwards. Remember what I'm saying? They were really backwards. Even after the Prophet had converted to Islam, they were still backwards. Okay? So when they invaded Egypt, they invaded a civilization that was old and that had all of these monuments and all of these scrolls laying in the tombs and everything. So you know what these guys did? They was using ancient scrolls that were invaluable for firewood, because it didn't matter to them, because it wasn't Islamic, it wasn't Muslim. So they was burning history, they were burning information. And what did Ali tell them? What did the commander of the faithful tell them? That Allah says you have to seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave, from the east to the west. You do not destroy knowledge. So those backwards Arabs who would have destroyed the inheritance of Egyptian culture understood that what they was doing was based on their ignorance. Allah said you should be reading those scrolls. You should learn from those things. So information and knowledge became a tenet of Islam. That's why you have some of the best universities in the world, in the early medieval world, were Islamic institutions. And they're the ones that perfected astronomy, perfected math, science. It was Muslims. So why would a Muslim pursue science if God was the answer to everything? Because they were commanded to pursue knowledge even if it was unto the gates of China. Okay? So that's how I want to answer your question. You know, you have to see it in the context of the people, where they were and what Islam did. Now we come to today. And we have a phenomenon like ISIS comes along and destroys knowledge. It's doing the exact same thing that the Prophet prohibited the faithful from doing. Destroying knowledge. Destroying the legacy of human knowledge. Okay? They did it exactly. So what does that tell you? What they was doing was un-Islamic. And they tried to portray it as being pure Islam. These were statues to idolatry. You don't worship Baal. When was the last time somebody prayed to Baal? Back in the days of Nebuchadnezzar or something? When's the last time you see Nebuchadnezzar around? About 2,000 years ago? Okay? So what these people that were doing in the name of Islam to Muslims was clearly wrong. Okay? But the way the West portrayed it, the West wanted to portray this as being Islam. Okay? Why? Because the West and the United States created ISIS. They helped create it when they invaded Iraq. Okay? So we need to, you need to really, I hope I answered your question. You see, it's not a question that Islam is a religion that has only 5 pillars of faith, and none of them is to destroy history and information. That's not what we're here for.
Okay, Dhoruba, sorry, but the last question here, and then we have to finish because it's really late now. Please.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for taking time for this presentation.
A little bit louder, please.
He's a soft-spoken man. That's good.
I was saying thank you very much for taking the time to spend this time with us these past 2 days. I actually do not have a question, I just have a comment. I think you noticed I got up very fast when this was happening. Normally in talks like this, I stay at the back and I just listen, because if I do start to speak, I will not stop.
Well, I hear you, bro. I hear you. that's good to know.
What I do want to say, and the reason I got up and why I'm speaking right now, the stakes are very high, the things we're talking about. We're talking about the survival of people. But we need to survive as individuals as well, and as organizations. In order to survive, we cannot allow ourselves to be destabilized by small events like this. Sometimes that destabilization is done on purpose.
Yes, of course.
I've been in certain situations with very high pressure in big groups. When the mood changes in the room, you need to know how to stabilize it very quickly.
Well, you know, we used to stabilize it very quickly by dragging the guy out, but you know, I didn't want to do that. I really wanted to because it wasn't that he was assault. Yeah, he was telling me that the reason why I was doing what I was doing was bullshit.
Yeah.
See, so that's why that would have been a good back and forth. But unfortunately, I think his English wasn't that good.
And this, excuse me for interrupting you, I just wanted to make a comment about that to Oliver and the organizers. English is not, many of us, it's not our first language. Mm-hmm. Perhaps you could consider that when somebody is not able to express themselves so well in English, perhaps you allow them to speak in German and somebody else
interpret.
Of course,
exactly.
Of course. But this guy who wanted only to say this is bullshit, I will blame for that.
Oh, okay.
That he is not able to say bullshit.
I don't want to talk about this.
Yeah, of course.
More because we're at peace now,
yeah.
And let's maintain the peace. And I'll finish by saying, when we greet each other, we say salam alaikum. And sometimes when you say goodbye, you have to say salam alaikum. That is a powerful thing to say to somebody. You wish peace upon him. And you can disarm a man like that very quickly by just saying, peace be upon him.
You see, you're a soft-spoken man. And that demeanor comes across. I mean, this is a compliment. You're a soft-spoken man, which tells you that, you know, certain situations can be handled by being calm and being forthright, okay? And that's true, you know, and you're a soft-spoken man. So that would be your first choice. Me, I come from a different background. My first choice is not that. My first choice is to just go street on them. You see what I'm saying? And so, but it's necessary for people like yourself to add some level of levity to what's happening. This is what I mean about organizations. Because we're all different. And we all have emotional responses, and some of us could be very objective, and some of us can't. You see? So, yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. That, in fact, that's what you would be urged to do in Islam. Say salam alaikum and be peaceful and try to, I mean, that's a dab. That would be a dab. You know, but me, you know, I get a little, you know, I'm a bad Muslim, man. So, you know, I lose it sometimes. And so, yeah, I appreciate that statement. I think everybody took heed to what he was saying, right? Yeah. But I think that really it would have been better if somebody would have interpreted for him. And if he would have refused the interpretation, which would mean that he didn't really have anything to say. You see, because he could articulate his position. You see, but his position was subjective. If his position was objective, if he had said that I find it difficult to believe that a revolutionary could evolve to a higher level through religion. Okay, so we could argue about that. You see what I'm saying? But he didn't say that. He said what I said was bullshit. But I was saying what I said about myself. I didn't say it about him. You see? So that, of course, brings me into a different mode. You know, I get into a different mode because where I come from, when you say bullshit, then it's a whole different script. You know, it's a whole different, so it's bullshit? So, okay, I tell you, how we going to deal with this now? You see what I'm saying? So that's my disposition. I know it's bad, but I got to get over it. And, you know, maybe I need some therapy or something.
Okay. Thank you very much. I know that there are many questions because Marco said to me there is another question, but I think as the time goes by, we have to finish now. It's 10 o'clock.
Oh, yeah.
You're tired.
It's past my bedtime.
Yeah, we have to go to eat something.
That's not true. I'm ready to go club.
Thank you very much, Dhoruba. Thank you for coming and joining us today. Please let some donations for the association hosting us and also some donations for Janub. For these events. We will offer to sign some posters by Dhoruba if someone wants to have a poster signed by Dhoruba. Thank you very much, have a nice time and goodbye.